On a cold autumn morning in a small American town, a little girl named Emily stood beside her mother Sarah outside a modest apartment. She was only 5 years old and held a small teddy bear that her father had given her on her last birthday. She did not understand why her parents had been arguing for weeks. That morning her father Daniel placed 2 suitcases into his car. Without looking back, he started the engine. Sarah begged him to stay, reminding him that their daughter needed her father more than ever. Daniel remained silent. He drove away, leaving behind the family he had promised to protect. Emily watched the car disappear down the road. She waited for hours, believing her father would return before sunset, but he never came. Life changed overnight. Sarah worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. She cleaned offices during the day and worked in a restaurant at night. While she struggled, Emily quietly helped around the house, learning responsibility at a very young age. Money was always short. They could not afford expensive toys, vacations, or new clothes, yet Sarah never allowed her daughter to lose hope. Every evening she would tell Emily that education was the one thing nobody could ever take away. Emily studied harder than anyone in her class. She borrowed books from the local library, stayed after school to ask teachers questions, and dreamed of becoming someone who could protect innocent people. Whenever Father's Day arrived, Emily smiled in front of her classmates, but cried quietly at home. She often wondered why her father had chosen to leave without saying goodbye. Years passed and Sarah's sacrifices slowly began to bear fruit. Emily graduated at the top of her high school class, earning a scholarship to one of the country's best law schools. As Sarah watched her daughter leave for college, tears filled her eyes. She knew every sleepless night, every extra shift, and every sacrifice had been worth it. Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would become a judge who believed in fairness, compassion, and truth. She would never allow another child to feel forgotten if she could help it. Little did she know that fate was preparing a moment neither she nor her father could ever imagine. The courtroom was filled with reporters, lawyers, and curious spectators. Everyone knew the case was important, but no one realized the judge and the defendant shared a painful past. Emily looked at the evidence with complete professionalism. She reminded everyone that every person who entered the courtroom deserved a fair hearing. Personal feelings had no place in justice. Daniel sat quietly as witnesses spoke one after another. For the first time in many years, he was forced to face the consequences of the choices he had made. As he listened, he kept glancing toward Judge Emily, wondering if she hated him for leaving so many years ago. During a break in the trial, Daniel asked his attorney a difficult question. "Is that really my daughter?" The attorney quietly nodded. Daniel lowered his head. He realized he had missed every birthday, every school graduation, and every important moment of her life. The successful business he had spent decades building suddenly seemed meaningless. The trial continued for several days. Emily carefully reviewed every document, listened to every witness, and made sure both sides were treated fairly. She refused to let her personal history influence the court. Finally, the day arrived for the verdict. The courtroom became completely silent. Emily explained that the decision would be based only on the evidence presented before the court. She found Daniel responsible for several financial violations according to the law. The sentence included financial penalties and legal consequences, but it also reflected the facts of the case rather than emotion or revenge. Daniel accepted the judgment without arguing. As the courtroom began to empty, he quietly said, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm sorry for leaving you and your mother." Emily looked at him for a long moment. She answered calmly, "You cannot change the past, but every person can choose what they do next." Those words were stronger than anger. Daniel understood that the greatest punishment was not the court's decision. It was realizing he had lost 30 years with the daughter he had abandoned. After the trial ended, Daniel quietly left the courtroom. Reporters surrounded him with questions, but he said nothing. For the first time in his life, he cared less about his reputation than about the daughter he had lost. Several weeks later, Daniel wrote a handwritten letter to Emily. In it, he admitted that leaving his family had been the greatest mistake of his life. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply thanked her for proving that justice could exist without hatred. Emily read the letter several times before placing it in a drawer. She knew that some wounds never disappear completely, But she also believed that carrying anger forever only creates more pain. One afternoon, Emily visited her mother, Sarah. They sat together in the small garden behind the house where Emily had grown up. Looking at the flowers, Sarah smiled and said, "I'm not proud because you became a judge. I'm proud because you became a good person." Those words meant more to Emily than every award and every achievement she had ever received. Months later, Daniel sold what remained of his business and quietly began volunteering at organizations that helped struggling families and children. He knew he could never recover the years he had lost, but he wanted the rest of his life to have meaning. One day, Emily agreed to meet him in a quiet park. There were no cameras, no lawyers, no courtroom, only a father and daughter separated by 30 years. Daniel looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I missed your entire life," he said softly. Emily replied, "You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can decide what kind of person you will be tomorrow." For the first time in decades, they shared an honest conversation. It did not erase the past, but it opened the door to peace. As the sun slowly set, Emily realized something important. Justice had given her responsibility. Forgiveness had given her freedom. Daniel walked away that evening with hope instead of regret, and Emily returned home knowing that true strength is not found in revenge but in wisdom, fairness, and compassion. Moral of the story: success is not about proving others wrong. True success is living with integrity, treating people fairly, and choosing forgiveness when your heart is strong enough to do so. College was not easy for Emily. She attended classes during the day and worked evenings at a small bookstore to help pay for living expenses. Every dollar she earned reminded her of the sacrifices her mother had made. Whenever she felt exhausted, she remembered Sarah's words: "Never let hardship decide your future." Emily graduated with honors from law school. She became a respected attorney known for her honesty, careful preparation, and compassion. After years of dedication, she was appointed as a judge. On the day she took the oath of office, Sarah sat proudly in the front row with tears of joy in her eyes. The little girl who had once been abandoned was now wearing a judge's robe. Meanwhile, Daniel's life had taken a very different path. After leaving his family, he focused only on making money. He built a successful construction company and became wealthy, but his personal life slowly fell apart. Business partners lost trust in him, financial problems grew, and several legal disputes followed. One morning, Emily received the schedule for the next month's court hearings. As she reviewed the files, one name immediately caught her attention: Daniel Carter. Her heart stopped for a moment. The man she had not seen in 30 years was now standing before the court as the defendant in a major fraud case involving his company. Emily closed the file and stared out the courtroom window. Memories of her childhood rushed back: the empty driveway, the lonely birthdays, and her mother working late into the night. She wondered if Daniel would even recognize her after all these years. On the morning of the trial, the courtroom was completely silent. Daniel walked inside looking older, tired, and worried. He slowly looked toward the judge's bench. The moment their eyes met, his expression changed. He recognized the little girl he had left behind. Emily remained calm and professional. She showed no anger and no emotion. She simply announced that the court was now in session. Daniel realized that the child he had abandoned had become the person who would oversee one of the most